And I mean, I think the main thing that I'd like to get across is that this is my absolute favorite work of fiction that I have read. I mean, the whole story was always extremely difficult to put down. You know, I kept on getting surprised and surprised, time and time again, and the overall that theme of revenge, you know, it really, really, really was entertaining for me and gripping, and it drew me in, and it wasn't until I got through about two other books after I finished this one that I was kind of, you know, out of sorts with like reading it a little bit. It was hard for me to leave the book and its characters upon finishing it because of how invested I was into the story. And it was definitely hard when I knew that I was within the last like 1 to 200 pages. I actually like took the deliverance to slow myself down so I could finish it throughout like a more prolonged period of
Oh,
time.
yes. Yeah, we're members of the Long Book Club. We get very stressed. It comes to the end, you know.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you know, is there any part of the, you know, about like the story overall that you would like to comment on, or kind of just your digestion of the book and of the storyline? Is there anything you'd like to kind of put out there before I ask you some of those questions that I have for you?
Well, and I can talk about this. My entry into this book was through my work on tragedy, and Eugene O'Neill, for whom I have done work and taught for many years. And his major work is Long Day's Journey into Night, where he talks about, and it's true, a true story. His father was James O'Neill, who was this famous actor whose fame came from playing the Count of Monte Cristo. And he came to feel that this was his tragedy because he played it for so long that he could never do anything else with his life. And so O'Neill really, but it also shaped O'Neill, who decided to be a playwright and to be talking about tragedy. So anyway, that was my window into the play. Like, well, what it was the play? Oh, well, what book was it based on?
Right.
You know.
Right.
And another aspect of it is that I do work. I lead a study abroad called The Genius of Study Abroad, A Tale of Two Cities, where I'm dealing with Charles Dickens and Victor Hugo.
Oh my God, that's awesome.
And so this book is, and I would talk about it, I see that as triumvirate, and they actually all knew each other, they hung with each other, and I am really struck by not only the similarities of Les Miserables and the Count of Monte Cristo and how they each were generated, but where Dumas departs and where Hugo departs from the essential story that they each, and I'm very interested in that, in what the revenge decision, and which, Dante's really feels is God. It was divine, whereas Hugo felt that what was divine was to forgive.
Right.
So you've got these contrasts, and they're just in there because it's so similar. So I'm very interested in that aspect, and what Dumas. I have a theory, Gabriel, for why I think that is, and why.
And what is
Dumas
that?
is very relevant. Well, you have to ask me on the podcast.
Okay.
And be surprised and surprised and surprised. No, so what is the format? Is it going to be that you're going to ask me questions?
Yeah. So I have those.
Okay, and then just cut me off for new questions. But I have done so much thinking about this now and research to be able to talk to you, like going back through all my notes and quotes. So I'm going to be sort of ready for whatever you're going to throw at me.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So I have 5 questions that I can pose to ask
good.
you. Yeah.
That's fine. and I'll sort of make of it where I will.
Sure.
How is
And
that?
that's great. And if you want to, upon answering it, if you want to kind of take it onto another tangent because of something that you thought was striking from the
Okay.
question, please feel free to do
Yeah.
that. I would love to
I
hear anybody else's intake
I love
from the
this.
book.
I love this. This has just begun. Now, yeah, I'm excited for what you're doing with this podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Imagine. Yeah. So, and you'll send it to me.
Absolutely, yeah. Once I have everything edited and everything posted, I'll definitely send you an
Yeah.
email. Okay,
This is
so
it.
to kick this off, the first question that I came up with was it had to do with the importance in Dante's physical transformation during his time in prison. So my question was, does the physical change shown by the main character, does the physical change shown by the main character reflect something about Dumas and how he views the the archetype of a strong person? And what I mean by the physical change throughout his time in prison was after he gets out and he's on his quest of revenge and he meets all these people in positions of high society. It's always talked about, his pale skin is always talked about, his strong jaw, the deep searching that his eyes do upon looking into somebody else's. Do you think that shows something about Dumas, or do you think that that's just what he came up with as the description for Dante's?
Well, I think that the strong man model, that's a very interesting thing, because when Dumas shows Dante's as suffering so exquisitely, he's first transformed from a really basically happy-go-lucky, innocent person to somebody who basically wants to die and is starving himself and becoming so weak. But when he meets the Abbe, he all of a sudden his eyes have life in them, and he's feeling his strength. So I think what you're pointing out is the character's consciousness of strength and resolve. It's kind of miraculous transformations that can come about
Yes,
through
absolutely.
hope. And when he finds out that they can escape, it's like strength poured into him, and then it's so improbable, but we've been set up to see it, that when he's escaping, I was really thinking very much of Odysseus, and here he is in the waves, and it's how can everything that he's gone through give him the strength to get out of that bag? The knot was 35 pounds, swim to an island so far away, how swim to the boat. Those are just miraculous powers. And so what you're saying is that his being strong, I think he felt this was God-given and miraculous, that he's supposed to fulfill this kind of destiny.
Right, and we're reminded of that as the reader when he kind of he confirms that. It's more so towards the end of the book, but he does, because there's this interior monologue presented to the reader at certain points. It might be once or twice, but he kind of questions himself, saying like, is this the right thing to continue to do? I've been so, he reflects on being so dedicated to his path of seeking revenge and remaining resilient through it, that I thought that it was super, super interesting to me to see him, question himself, and we got that more so humane side of him instead of this almost pedestalized, almost godlike person in terms of his capabilities, his power, and his decision making.
Yes, well, I remember there's a quote he says, I wish to be Providence myself, for I feel that the most beautiful, noblest, most sublime thing in the world is to recompense and punish. So I think that's how he integrated it when he was saying, should I do this? But I'm really struck that when he was in prison, really feeling that, I was really thinking of Dante, of course, and being in hell and that connection with Dante's. But the Abbé at one point when they're talking to each other says, I'm really sorry that I've shared, we see he's so violated and hurt and
Right.
wounded, and we're so shocked. And we see the transformation through suffering, so we're really with him. But then when he gets this burst of energy and hope and a sense of revenge, the Abbé says, I'm sorry, that I've told this to you because of what you're going to do with it and revenge. And Dante's just smiled and, said, let's talk about something else.
And that actually leads into my next question. If, because I always, after I finish a book, especially a great one that has such depth and development through the characters, the Abbé is somebody that we get only a little sliver of in terms to the whole storyline of the book, but he happens to be one of my favorite characters because of,
Yes.
his intelligence, his passing on of knowledge to Dante's, his selflessness when it comes to escaping and leaving him.
Yeah.
And my question is, and something that I've thought of because I create these interesting parallels about which way the book could have gone possibly, was that let's say the Abbé didn't die and he escaped with Dantes and they both successfully somehow managed to get out, whether it was them staying longer and digging more or, whatever way it could have been. Do you think he would have partnered with Dantes, not in terms of partnered with him to tie into that revenge that Dantes was fulfilling, but to kind of guide him and stay there for him, almost as a ballast, like the position he kind of held for Dantes in the prison?
Oh, okay. I love that question. So we go with first how we see his values. He said, I found the quote, I regret now, said he, having helped you in your late inquiries or having given you the information I did. Why so? Inquired Dantes. Because it has instilled a new passion in your heart, that vengeance. Dantes went, let us think it's something else. So what I think is, based on everything that the Abbé has presented to him, all of the basically humanity's learning in every language, all the philosophers that he's talking about, I think he would have been a moral guide. And so if we're going to connect this to Dante, who was also a figure of political exile in his day, so we have Dante's, and Hugo is writing his work as an exile. Dumas was basically an exile. So they all share this exile experience politically. I think that the Abbé would have been the Virgil figure from the Inferno. So that when we see at the beginning of the Inferno, Canto 1, it says, in the middle of our lives, I found myself on this path. I was trembling. It was the worst experience ever. And this is what Dantes is experiencing in Castle Diff. And he says, well, oh, I was just so terrible. And then, there was this figure, this apparitional figure. And the way that Dumas represents it is exactly back to Dante. And first it's this ghostly figure, and then he actually appears, and it's Virgil, and he leads him to the light. And I feel that with the Abbé, he really had a political passion that was very, very in line with Dumas and Victor Hugo. They were on the same side politically of what was happening in France. And Dumas represents the Abbe as believing wholly in the Republic.
Right.
And that's what Dumas believed. So I believe that the ironic norm, the character that represents the author here, Dumas, is the Abbe. And I think that he would definitely involve and inspire Dante's in political work, but not the revenge, which takes me to my theory of why Dumas pursued the revenge option, okay? And I think it was a personal reason of writing this book. That his father was Black. His father was the son of an enslaved African woman in Haiti with a count. So he was illegitimate and Black. And he got on the wrong side. He served Napoleon nobly and very innocently because of Napoleon's jealousy of him. He was the first Black general in France. He wreaked vengeance and havoc on him and basically ruined him, took away his pension, and imprisoned him unfairly. And being in prison really affected the spirit and the body of Dumas's father, so that he died when Dumas was 4 years old, and the family was without any means at all because Napoleon had not only imprisoned him, but taken away his pension. So his father died, and I believe that Dumas wrote this book, The Count, for the Count who was his grandfather, to on behalf of his father, to right those wrongs. And that personal sense of mission was the vengeance and the emotional part that Dumas had, which made him different from his friend Victor Hugo. They both started this story at the same time in the early 1840s. It took Hugo 20 years to write it, and Dumas's version came out first, serialized for 2 years between 1844 and 1846. Dumas comes out with him in the 1860s. But Victor Hugo has Jean Valjean also unfairly imprisoned and all of that. He could say my life is ruined, but he also met a man of the church who gave him wealth to disguise himself and become, so it's the same plot, to become a wealthy man and to have a mysterious and power now in society. But he decides to do good with it. And the priest there says, a man of God, you've been transformed. And Dumas said, no, I'm not going to go that route.
Right.
And I feel that is because he was doing it on behalf of his father. And if you said, if the Abbe had been alive, Dumas makes it very clear that it would have been different, because what the Abbe has to give is really Dumas himself, and the tremendous learning he has, and also his friend Victor Hugo, who, after writing about an imprisoned man, Dumas went there to celebrate with him, and he lifted him up and he said, "We will carry you to glory." So it was,
So, I hate to interrupt you, but it's so funny that you went about talking about, the reality of the political turmoil. at that time, because one of my questions, and after you had just explained to me, what the reality was like with his father being in exile because of Napoleon, the pension being removed. A question that I had, which, like I said, you just fully answered, was that do we see Dumas representing the political landscape of the time in a way that shows his opinions? And
absolutely,
yeah, 100%, right, 100%. And it's so funny because, and I don't know if this is true, but you just mentioned almost word for word, I don't want to get this wrong, that Dumas was kind of writing this almost as a tribute, to kind of
yes,
rewrite the reality of the wrong that was done to his father.
Yes.
I think that if I had known that before reading this book, that I would have been able to say, okay, this is the reason why this seems so gripping, so almost like it had happened to the person. It's like these,
yes, I agree.
The angles that are taken in terms of approach for revenge, whether it's faking a persona, just the way everything was gone about was so precise, so planned out, so smart, so absolute genius by Dantes in the book, which I think is just, it makes me really, really appreciate this work of writing, because like I said, this is completely my favorite work of fiction. 100% my favorite story. And that'll lead me into one of my final questions, which is that, so part of, like I've explained, part of the reason why I'm so drawn to this book is because of Dantes's resilience and his perseverance and his will to continue to pursue throughout every single hardship, throughout all the difficult years of being in nothing but darkness and that cell, and I've come to the conclusion that this can't only be gripping and drawing in for me as a reader. It has to, be something about it that is almost magnetizing for the reader. Do you think that there's a reason that the resilience and perseverance shown by him is so, maybe not easy for a reader to digest, but like easy for a reader to kind of hook onto and continue writing out that storyline to see what happens?
Well, I think what you said, why this is so gripping, you said that, we connect with this story. And he does this masterful job of getting us to identify with Dantes and to suffer exquisitely with him, and to feel so shocked and violated by what happens to him, the kind of detail that's given, the smells, the darkness, what he's noticed, and when his sense of hopelessness and despair and the pendulum with hope and so on. And when he meets the Abbe, he says that he's a genius, and he says, "You must teach me a small part of what you know. What shall you teach me first? I'm in a hurry to begin. I want to learn." It's as if he takes on, as you described, the genius of creativity. When you talk about resilience, I think that what we're seeing here is creativity. And it's so interesting that this was made into a play, which was my first contact with this work, because Dantes is an actor. He's both the playwright and the actor. And Dumas was the playwright and the actor. I mean, he was a playwright as well as a novel, and he really loved dialogue. But this character, his genius is taking on these roles and figuring out the plot.
Right.
And then enacting it, literally acting.
That's another thing I wasn't aware of, but now that you say it, that's actually very, it's almost funny to a way, because It translates to both stage and book. That's super, super interesting. I mean, I'm super, right now, I've repeated so many times. I've never had another person to talk to in depth about this book.
Oh,
As soon as I finished it, I recommended it to my dad. He charged through about the first 300 pages, and then he slowed down. And same thing with my mom, charged through about the first 200 pages and then slowed down a bit. But this book reminds me so much of why I love reading so much, and why I love
yeah.
literature and dialogue and story and plot, and character development. And
Yeah.
I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me about this work. Unfortunately, it's been around 30 minutes that we've been recording now.
Oh no!
But
Oh no!
but because I have so much more to talk about, and because I definitely have more questions that I can come up with now that I know a bit more of the background, my question for you is if you would be willing to do a second episode about
Oh, I would
more
love to.
with more questions.
I would love to.
That,
I
that
would love to. Because listen, Dumas, this is large.
Right.
This is a big book. This
Right.
is not a small book. We're
Exactly.
talking. Yeah. And so these are big issues and momentous. And I love that you are bringing this to our world today. This is really important. And I love talking to you about this and engaging with you. So thank you.